Module 1. The Impending Causes of a Global Disaster. The Case for a Survivalist Mentality. If you put a frog into a pot of room temperature tap water and then put it on the stove, the water will slowly heat up until it eventually boils. The frog, however, won't feel the slow but steady rise in temperature and will eventually cook himself to death without ever trying to escape from the pot of water. Since the temperature rises slowly, he simply is unable to detect the changes that for us outside observers are blatantly obvious. In many ways, we're all too similar to that frog. For the last 250 years or so, since the start of the Industrial Revolution, the world around us has slowly but assuredly risen close to the boiling point. But many of us simply haven't noticed because, like our proverbial frog, we've become too accustomed to our surroundings. To an alien observer of Western culture, the threats to our long-term well-being would most likely be obvious. Our alien spectator would probably be like the young child looking over the frog in the pot of water, yelling at us to jump, 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 and then feeling perplexed at why we allowed ourselves to boil. Despite our accustomedness to the status quo, the cold, hard facts are undeniable. Let's take a quick look at some of the most palpable aspects of our unsustainable, flawed society. In the last 250 years, our population has risen from 1 billion in 1800 to 7.5 billion. By 2050, there will be over 9 billion people. Global inequality has risen to dramatic proportions. The top 1% of the wealthiest millionaires in the world now have more combined wealth than the rest of the 99% of the world's population. And only 62 of the wealthiest billionaires in the world have as much wealth as half of humanity. Our economic system is dependent on continued, sustained, unlimited growth. Unfortunately, we don't live in a vacuum, but rather in a closed biological system with very real limits on the natural resources we use. Our entire society, including how we produce our food and how we get our water, is completely dependent on oil, an unrenewable resource that sooner or later will run out. In an effort to keep our economy growing, the U.S. government creates money out of thin air through a process called quantitative debt easing. In turn, this has pushed us into $19 trillion of debt, which is more than 100% of the country's GDP. Our economy is thus floating on numbers and does not rest on anything tangible or real. We have to ask ourselves if we prefer to be the frog or if we prefer to be the child yelling frantically at the frog to jump out of the pot. For many of us, turning a blind eye to the undeniable fact that our society is headed on a crash course for disaster is what we prefer. It comforts us to think that wealth will eventually trickle down to calm the worst aspects of inequality. We feel reassured in the promises of technology and believe that eventually we'll develop technological ways to fix the mess we're in, without having to make too many changes to a lifestyle that has come to define us. Albert Einstein warned us, however, that, quote, no problem can be solved from the same mindset that created it, unquote. If we continue to believe that the problems created by the status quo will be fixed by the status quo, then the existence of our species is at risk. Although many of us may wish to deny that fact, there does seem to be an underlying awareness that something's not right and that disaster is just around the corner. Every year, Hollywood comes out with at least a few blockbuster hits that show disasters reducing humanity to a few valiant survivors who usually end up fighting zombies. Though exaggerated and Hollywoodized, the popularity of global disaster movies in our culture is a manifestation of our hidden fears and reluctant recognition that our society isn't very well structured. The astrophysicist Stephen Hawking once remarked that human beings wouldn't survive as a species for another 1,000 years, quote, without escaping beyond our fragile planet, unquote. It can be depressing when some of the most brilliant minds on our planet basically concede defeat and accept that humanity is nothing more than a cancerous presence on this earth. With all respect to Mr. Hawking, we will attempt to show in this course that our fragile planet can continue to support human life if we make changes in how we interact with the world around us. Though this course won't touch on interplanetary travel, nor explain strategies to combat zombies, We do believe that developing a survivalist mentality is both urgent and necessary for those of us who have the courage to look honestly at the faults of the civilization we've created, and who are interested in finding ways to live sustainably upon this earth that is our home. This course, then, seeks to give you the tools you need to remove your livelihood from a system that is fundamentally flawed and incapable of offering society a path forward. It aims to guide people to survive and thrive in a world that is more sustainable in the long run.